Hello, hello. Welcome to the 47th episode. I cannot believe we're almost to 50 of the Veggies Abroad Vegan Travel Podcast with the Chief Veggie Pusher, myself, Rebecca Gady-Sawicki. Some of you may already be familiar with Veggies Abroad, but for those of you who aren't, we're a full-service vegan travel company that offers custom planning services, small group trips, a helpful blog chock full of just about everything a vegan or veg-curious traveler could possibly need, and this podcast. With this podcast, I aim to amplify the voices of businesses championing vegan and vegan-friendly options, responsible tourism practices, the environment, and community impact. All things that we need more of and must actively support. So just to backtrack for a moment on the fact that we're almost to 50 podcast episodes. I don't know if you feel like that's a lot, but it truly is a lot. It's been nothing short of a giant undertaking to get to 50, and I cannot believe it actually happened, and it happened really fast. I was thinking back over some of my favorites. There was the conversation with Friends of the Earth about the impact of cruising, the fun chat with a couple who started the first vegan hotel in Oaxaca, discussions about Colombia, South Africa, and so many more. It is really a little crazy to look back and see how much we've been able to pack in, but there is still a whole lot out there to talk about. Anyway, that was just my own side reflection / ramble, but today's conversation will also easily fit into one of my favorites. Talking about voluntourism has long been on my list, but I struggled to find just the right person to do it. After literal hours of searching, conversations with colleagues, I was finally introduced to today's guest, who just so happens to also be vegan. I think our meeting was probably serendipitous. If you've ever thought about combining your love of travel with giving back, this episode is for you. We've all seen the photos of people volunteering abroad, building schools, working with kids, helping at wildlife sanctuaries, but is it always doing the good that we think it is? My guest today, Claire Bennett, has spent years in the industry, and she's here to pull back the curtain. Claire has a background in international development, experiential education, anti-trafficking advocacy, and responsible tourism. She co-authored the book Learning Service, The Essential Guide to Volunteering Abroad, which Noam Chomsky described as an extraordinary contribution, a manifesto for doing good well. Native to the UK, she has lived in Nepal for 15 years, where she was a co-founder of Phase Worldwide, an organization supporting communities in remote mountainous regions. She has worked all over Asia and beyond, providing training and consultancy to NGOs, travel companies, and universities, as well as leading experiential education programs for adolescents. Passionate about global equality and social justice, these values drive everything she does. Claire is an incurable optimist and has boundless energy, mainly fueled by caffeine from her British tea drinking habit. Let's get over to my chat with Claire. Claire, thank you so much for joining me today. I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, of course. You have had such a varied career, from international development to anti-trafficking advocacy and responsible tourism. What led you to focus on volunteerism?
Okay, so all of those things seem very varied, but actually they're kind of all linked, because all of these fields, it comes back to this same fundamental question of how can outsiders have a positive impact on issues that don't directly affect them. So I have been working in international development. That was kind of maybe where this focus started, of, trying to work out how to solve issues and to work out where my place, as someone that comes from the UK, and I've worked mainly in Asia. And, I helped to found a non-profit organization, and, was involved in lots of different kind of, ways of answering this bigger question. And I think we, just finding so many roadblocks, so much complexity to navigate, and realizing that even with all the resources and experience of the aid sector behind us, it's still incredibly challenging to make a positive impact. And so, I was working in that sector and finding it really frustrating. And meanwhile, I was also witnessing, lots of teenagers coming on their 2-week volunteer trip And, they all had matching T-shirts that say things like improving Nepal's schools or saving Cambodians' children. And finding that, there wasn't any sort of critical engagement with what they were doing. So I guess the reason that I became so drawn to working in this particular field is not to say that those idealistic young people are, doing something wrong, or that, they're the sort of, that we should be kind of targeting our criticism towards them, but more to sort of recognize that there is an enormous misfiring of good intentions, and an enormous missed opportunity to properly channel all of that, energy and sort of wish to change the world. So I think it's really great that we have young people and, all people interested in, tackling global issues. But maybe it's not so great that they're being encouraged to do so, to sort of engage with these issues in a very simplistic way, and not encouraged to grapple with the reality of, the issues that are facing the world today. So really, when I was looking at where my role was, and I was very much questioning, how could I have an impact in problems that were overseas, I found that in thinking about my role as someone that could raise awareness with people that were maybe kind of similar to me. I was also a teenager that wanted to change the world, and also started off my career volunteering. And so I found that I had a lot of power, a big sort of voice in that, and that maybe this was the area in which I could make the most change.
I find that so interesting that you were once the teenager that was doing the volunteering, and now you're on the other side of it. Do you think at that point when you were starting out and, embarking in the world and wanting to make a difference, that you saw the issues maybe that were inherent in it?
I would love to say that I did. And I think, again, one of the reasons that I'm so interested in doing advocacy around this area is that, as a young person that hadn't traveled very much and didn't have much experience in the sector of international development, that no, I really didn't. I couldn't see that many issues. I really enjoyed my time volunteering. And that is what brought me back. I feel like a lot of people, when they go for a volunteer stint, it's a couple of weeks and it's really fun and it might be really life-changing or something that, people think about for a long time afterwards. And a few people end up going back and dedicating more of their time to doing work like that. And I was one of those. And the longer that I stayed in one place, the more that I started to see the same kind of groups of young people turning up, doing something that was at best very tokenistic, but over and over again you see people coming and doing the same thing, making the same mistakes, not really having very much impact at all, and all the time believing that this was their answer and feeling really good about themselves. And I think it was actually only afterwards, quite some time afterwards, when I started to reflect on my own experiences volunteering and started to maybe, so I guess sort of realize that I had a place to, because personal stories can be quite powerful. So I definitely wasn't going to put myself above any of these people. I was just saying, this is my story, where I've come from with it, and why I'm now sort of speaking out against some of these bad practices, and found that would be listened to, and that, people are always interested in hearing personal stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think always our stories are what puts us on the paths that we end up on, and learning from those, and then trying to help the next group of people that are coming behind us to not maybe make our same mistakes. So let's start first by defining what we're exactly talking about today, because voluntourism means sometimes different things to different people. How would you define this industry?
Yeah. So obviously, if we look at this word voluntourism, it's a combination of these two words, volunteering and tourism. And that you can see that already these two words are kind of in tension with each other. So if we can see that volunteering is, do it the good part, giving back, making a difference. The focus is on the other, on the people that you want to help. That's the idea of volunteering, is that you're doing things for others. But then you get the tourism part, which is more of a leisure activity. It's often seen as something that's very indulgent. And the focus is on the traveler. So you can see how there is tension between these two words being put together. With voluntourism, the volunteer, the person traveling, is still very much considered like the client. And so the experiences have to be designed for and work for the volunteer. And it's complicated that there is also often a profit motive, as there is with tourism. There are organizations that sell these placements. And so in a way, you can see already that if something is marketed like that it doesn't really add up to being able to solve an issue sustainably, or, prioritize local voices, or, local leadership. And it becomes more about designing a marketable experience for volunteer, where the main thing is that they can feel like they have contributed, rather than something has happened that has actually contributed to solving an issue.
And I think what helps further paint the picture of this industry, and this surprised me when I read this stat, and I actually don't have the year that it is associated with it. I think it's within the last couple of years, but it is estimated that the voluntourism industry generates between $2 to $3 billion annually and attracts over 10 million participants each year. I did not realize that.
Yes, and it's something that's really difficult to gauge, because obviously there is no central body that is monitoring any of this. So that is an estimate of people that are going through volunteering organizations, or paying for a volunteer experience. But it's likely that there's actually even more people that just book a flight themselves and go and find volunteer opportunities by themselves, or even when they're there. So it is a huge thing, and I think it's a fundamental part of traveling. I think is that people are going to places that they find really interesting, but also maybe they are affected by global inequality, confronted by poverty, and asking themselves, how can I help? So instead of thinking, I can travel in this place or have a tourism experience, I think there's this other layer of, if I go to this place, then I have to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about voluntourism projects, what exactly would be some examples of some of those?
So honestly, it can look like almost anything really, but there are some that are, I guess, more popular, possibly because they're more easily contained, they're more easily marketable. So you do see a lot of things like people working in construction. It's like, build a well, build a school. And I think those things are very popular because people can see some kind of product, some kind of end result of, I did this thing, and it, that thing is still there. It's a concrete thing, which again, I think people can mistake something that is tangible for something that is effective, right? So just because there is a building there doesn't mean that the building was built well, or that it is needed, or that it then functions, has the human resources to function. But that is one huge one. And then another one, I think, is some kind of volunteering with children. Again, it's very feel good. So it's volunteering with children in orphanages, in schools, in daycare centres, in slums, and sometimes. That is another huge one. You can get volunteering with wildlife. So that's anything from I don't know, like counting turtles or something was part of a bigger ecosystem kind of survey, or something along the lines of, looking after wildlife in a shelter, which again is something that sounds so great on the surface, but can have loads of problems with it, because some of these wildlife shelters are actually, they're just sort of breeding centres that are using the wildlife as a kind of tourist attraction, so that people think that they're doing some volunteering that is useful. And actually, again, it's the profit motive of hosting people to do something that, that's something that they're interested in doing. So it's having interactions with wildlife. Almost anything that you could think of is something you could find a volunteering program in, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy, the long list of opportunities that are out there, just like how large this industry is. And you started to kind of slightly touch on this with your examples. Generally, travelers, when they're doing something like this, or people in general, they're doing it as a way to give back. But there are a whole lot of misconceptions around that giving back. Can you talk about some of those and how they're actually not really helping?
Yeah, sure. I think, if you think about, if you are really motivated to quote unquote give back, if you are trying to do that while fitting it into a vacation, both in the timeline that you have for a vacation and in terms of what it looks like, so that it's, something that can be palatable to, can sort of fit with your idea of a vacation, then that is how it becomes kind of less likely to help. The question that is asked at the beginning is not what is needed here, but it's more like what can be done within this time frame, maximum 2 weeks, with this resource. It could be like a group of 16-year-olds, and with the consideration that it also has to be fun, and we have to balance it with tourism activities and things like that, because ultimately, this is something that the volunteer is actually paying for. And if you start with a different question, if you start with, well, what is needed in this context, in this place, to solve this issue, then it becomes much wider and kind of more interesting. It needs a lot more delicate handling, possibly more intensive input, definitely more locally driven leadership and, ideas for solutions. So it's not to say that outside volunteers, even in their short period of time, can't have a role. I think what we normally advocate is that it might look very different to what you initially, your initial ideas of what volunteering might look like.
I think that's a great point, because, just from the standpoint of looking at it from the point of the community and not at the point of the traveler, because when you were describing that as like, this activity is for this age group, it is available from December 2nd to December X, you're really describing another tour. You're not really describing an altruistic activity that's going to be beneficial necessarily to this place or these people.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that we ask people to do is, if you're considering going on a volunteer experience, is really starting by questioning why it is that you feel drawn to doing this, and to really question your motivation. So we always say to start with the self, because what we often find is that if we say, okay, I want to volunteer, but I only have this amount of time, and I need to combine it with a vacation, and, I need to make sure that it, I don't know, builds my resume in a certain way. Then, but basically, the more that you unpack your own motivations, the more you're going to find something that will actually fit with what you really want. So, if you actually want to just have a vacation, there is nothing wrong with that. And, it doesn't mean you can't give back in other ways, but forcing your giving back into a short time might end up doing more harm than good. is it that you want to travel without feeling guilty? Like, are there other ways in which you can contribute? Is it that actually what you really need to do is learn about a place or about an issue? Do you want to have a more immersive experience? That's often, people are looking for local connection, and you can also do that without necessarily, fitting yourself into a volunteer program. And then the other thing is, do you want to take effective action to change something, which might not involve traveling anywhere? If that is your true motivation, then, there are other ways in which you can think about contributing. So I always say, anyone that's asking, I want to volunteer in XXX place, to just be like, okay, take a few steps back, like work out why you want to do this and if you want to do this, considering that, it's a bit more challenging than you might think to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some of these things might already exist in your own backyard, in which you can affect a longer term change and make more of a difference in your own community, and have it be more meaningful than traveling for a weekend to somewhere else and dropping in and dropping out, which is based on your schedule. Something somebody has said to me in the past is, as long as we're doing something, that's better than nothing. But I think in that statement is incredibly problematic, and the reality is far more complicated and even damaging. The desire, again, to do good, sometimes can turn poverty into a tourist attraction. Can you share an example of maybe a well-intentioned volunteer project and how that ended up doing more harm than good?
Yes, absolutely. So the something better than nothing argument is certainly one that is quite dangerous. There is so many assumptions built into that phrase. So even the assumption that, quote unquote, nothing is currently being done is so grossly inaccurate in so many cases. It assumes that local people are sitting around ignoring a problem, waiting for a savior to come from outside. Whereas usually issues are desperately more complicated than that. And there are local groups working tirelessly on issues. And it's likely that, the issue is really entrenched, or the people working on it are severely under-resourced, or, it could be that there's like political problems. There's always so many other things when you start, investigating why an issue is being perpetuated. And if you want to have an example of how can doing something, or how can a well-intentioned action actually do harm, the issue that we always use, because it's so stark and shocking, is that of orphanages. Volunteering in orphanages is something that it's very easy to market because it seems so easy, right? Like, oh, just play with children. It's so feel good, right? These are forgotten children that just, need someone to give them a smile, something like that. But there is research from the world over, so many different countries. I know of research in at least 10 countries now that have shown that voluntourism in orphanages causes a lot of damage. So there's a lot of different layers to it. I think firstly, just if we think about the idea of orphanages, they are an extremely outdated solution. Western developed countries no longer have orphanages. We used to, and they were closed down because they were doing damage to children. That was found, I think, in, Canada. They have the stolen generations. They have the same in Australia with Indigenous communities there. They just did a lot of research and realized that children's outcomes were very, very poor in orphanages, socially, and even their brain development is affected. And so what is happening is that because, it is a very popular volunteering choice, that it's sort of incentivizing this as a solution overseas, even though it's one that we have said is not good enough for, our own countries or our own children. And more funding is poured into that, and people are putting children into orphanages because it's an easy way to get outside attention and to attract foreign support. And secondly, this leads on to the fact that in order to get children into the orphanages, there's something called orphanage trafficking. So again, consistently all over the world, at least 80% of the children that are in orphanages have parents. And in some places, it's much higher than this. Children can be routinely separated from their parents because someone can make money from them. So usually it's families that are somewhat in poverty that are told that, look, the foreigners are going to come and teach you, or they'll get nice treatment from the foreigners that have lots of money, and they convince parents to send their kids, often very young kids, and those children are often permanently separated from their parents. They have faked death certificates, and they change their names and all kinds of things because they know that children can be a fundraising tool. And there's no incentive to invest in an orphanage or to make it really a nice place for children. There's no incentive to, even feed the children nice food or give them nice toys or anything like that, because the poorer the orphanage looks, the more malnourished the children look, the more that people are moved to help. And so, if you volunteer with children that look like they're really struggling, people will do a lot to continue sending money to that place. So there's actually for some of the worst places, a real incentive for child abuse, honestly. Thirdly, if you think about who is appropriate to be interacting with vulnerable and traumatized children, it's really unlikely to be a voluntarist who usually has no formal training, any of this, and who can only be around for a very short period of time. And so what happens is that the volunteers end up exacerbating attachment disorders in children and abandonment issues, because those children already feel like, they have been left by a family, and then they build up new bonds with volunteers that will give their love very easily, and then they leave again. And it causes a huge effect on these children. And then finally, I'll just mention that even volunteers with the best of intentions that are going to volunteer in these orphanages, the very fact that they can do that means that the channels are open for individuals with more nefarious intentions towards those children. If you can get in, and if you can, volunteer in a place where children are living and sleeping and they have no parental supervision, they're sort of very easy targets for paedophiles. And this, again, a strong link has been drawn in many countries between children living in institutions and outsiders that are looking to exploit children. So it can go to very dark places. And this is just coming from one example of something that when you first introduce it, people are like, well, how can that possibly have any bad outcomes if it's just going for a couple of weeks to play with some neglected children? It can seem so positive on the surface, but this action, this one nice thing that you're doing, can actually have, in all different kinds of ways, that actually contributes to the exploitation of those very children that you're aiming to help.
I feel like there are really no words for that. I'm really beside myself that humans would allow something to happen like that. Wow.
It's very difficult, because when you look at this particular issue, there's no one person to blame exactly. So, people point the fingers at parents that allow their children to go and live in institutions. But those parents are usually in extreme poverty and often are tricked by traffickers. People point the fingers at the traffickers, which under international law it's illegal, but they will say that they're social workers that are trying to get children out of impoverished families and accessing things like education in the city and things like that. So people will see them as they're great charity workers that are helping children. And then you can point the fingers at the orphanages themselves and say, this is exploitative. And then the orphanages will say, well, we have to raise X amount of money a month. It's extremely expensive to run an orphanage. If you think, even if you have, 30 kids, but some of them have hundreds, and you have to feed them, and you have to clothe them, and you have to somehow get some kind of education, and somehow have some kind of supervision, and, healthcare, and all these other things, it's really expensive. So yeah, they don't invest in the children, and that's because it's hard for them to raise their costs every month. And then you can finally point the fingers at the volunteers, and the volunteers are the ones that usually are doing their best to try and do something nice. And so what we'll say is that the leverage point basically is the volunteers. And so that's where we're trying to educate people to sort of see the consequences of their actions. Because, all the way along the chain, people are pointing fingers everywhere else. But if the money stops, like there would not be any orphanage trafficking if there wasn't a profit motive. So if people stop investing in orphanages and, seeing that as a good place to fundraise for or a good place to volunteer in, then there would be no incentive to be separating children. And, we might be able to get more interest in other kinds of solutions, such as trying to support families, families that are at the brink, to keep the children with them rather than feeling forced to send them away.
Hey there, fantastic listeners. Let's hit pause on this episode for a thrilling announcement, a golden ticket to Globetrot with Veggies Abroad. Veggies Abroad isn't just your go-to for vegan guides and trip planning tips. It's your passport to extraordinary small group journeys, carefully crafted by the ultimate veggie pusher and your favorite podcast host, me, Rebecca Gady-Sawicki. I've spent countless hours researching the best vegan hotels, food, and experiences, and now I'm bringing those experiences directly to you. Join me and my newfound veggie pals on escapades to exotic and exciting destinations around the world, whether it's trekking through the Thai jungle to witness elephants in their natural habitat or exploring Iceland's famous ring road. Our adventures are nothing short of spectacular, and guess what? Those aren't the only exciting trips awaiting you. So what are you waiting for? Cruise on over to veggiesabroad.com pronto. Well, how about after this episode is over to explore our dazzling lineup of tours and secure your spot today. Yeah, absolutely. I think, like with so many things, it comes back to the power of supply and demand. If there's no demand for it, then it won't exist. And yeah, as consumers, we're at the helm of that. When I first started working in the travel industry, I naively did not think about orphanage tours. It just was something that had never entered my purview. And I had someone email me, and I was running a trip, and she said, "We have this school in Kenya, and we'd love for you to bring your travelers there." I remember I was like just dumbfounded. Like, why in the world would you want some random travelers come and interrupt your school day? And I think I probably... Maybe I should have handled my response to her a little bit differently, but I was just like so dumbfounded by the question. And so I said something along the lines of, well, I wouldn't interrupt the school day anywhere else. Why would I interrupt the school day with like foreigners in your country? Like that wouldn't be acceptable here. And I don't remember if I ever got a response back from her, but I think even something that seems as innocent as you're just coming for a visit, but that visit then carries the weight of you need to perform for these people who are generally coming from some kind of a privileged position, and that they're important. But at the end of the day, they're no different than the rest.
Yeah, I think that point that you made is a really good one. That if you're not allowed to do it at home, why would you be allowed to do that elsewhere? And so, yeah, like we would never have tour groups rock up to an elementary school and go and take photos of the children. That seems horrific.
Right.
But somehow overseas, there is an idea that is more acceptable. And so it's a really good question to ask yourself of when you're thinking about doing any volunteer project, it's, would I be allowed to do that at home? Do I have the skills to do that at home? Because it's actually, I need more skills to do that in someone else's country. So if I can't even do it at home, then I shouldn't be thinking about doing it overseas.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I think that leads like really well into some of your other examples, like with construction, building a school. If you've never built something before, why do you think you can go to Cambodia and build something or teach someone English or, oh geez, I don't know. I think there are a whole list of things, which is really important for someone to challenge themselves with. Of just because you leave your home doesn't all of a sudden give you some kind of magical Harry Potter skills.
Right, exactly. I think there's, when you're talking about all the different risks involved, trying to think about what skills you have and how they are, how they're transferable. Because even if you might have skills to do something in your own home, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to do it somewhere else. And there are sometimes there are skills that seem like they might be easy to do. Like we just had the example of working with children. Things like doing construction. People think like, oh, it's just physical labor. It shouldn't be that hard. But actually, the amount of supervision that it can take, like even if you are just doing the sort of lowest manual labor, the question that we need to ask is, what is it again that is needed? And usually it's not to do with a shortage of manual labor that these projects are not being done. So yeah, I would just say that when you're thinking about what task it is that you're doing, you need to really interrogate it and really have some good, robust reasoning why you're the person that is best placed to do it.
Yeah, 1,000%. And I think this leads really well into, some of these projects unintentionally reinforcing inequalities like power imbalances, cultural issues, and dependency showing up in these voluntourism projects. What are some of the impacts of some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So voluntourists showing up in a place where they don't know the language, where they don't understand the culture, and where they are necessarily disconnected to certain people in the community, usually the most powerful ones, like the leaders or, people that know how to speak English, for example. And they're usually there for a very short time. So in short, you sort of have to admit that you don't know very much about the place, the people, or the issue that you're working on. But, you're coming into that situation with both actual and cultural capital. So you're coming from a powerful country, usually, and you have money. That's how you got there. So what that means is that often you might be accorded more decision-making power than is appropriate for the role that you're in. That's one thing, is that it's a real red flag to look out for, is that if your voice in a project is carrying a lot of weight when actually you don't have very many stakes in the game. Or on the other hand, it also makes you very easy to exploit, because you don't understand maybe the language, maybe the culture, and you're just being told what to do by your contact there. So, for example, is a project that I observed, which was that they were like going around different beneficiaries in a village and building things for them, or making a farm, or giving animals, or it was like water supply and things like that. All of the projects were going to the coordinator's relatives, who were actually some of the most rich people in the community anyway.
Oh, wow.
And for if the poorer people wanted it, the coordinator was actually selling the projects to the poorer people. So it was like, again, but if you're just coming in from outside, you don't see the power dynamics in a community. You can't necessarily tell who's more well off, or how did this person get selected. And it's like, oh, this is so-and-so, we're going to build this for them. It if you're not questioning that, it just sounds like oh, great, I can see the result of this, and this person's happy with me. But within a community, it can really destroy kind of very delicately balanced relationships and power dynamics and all of that.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely not something you would see on the surface level. And other things that I was reading about is, these people coming in and doing this job for free, you could be taking away somebody else's job that lives nearby and really could use this, and then support their family, which then if they're able to support their family, there's the, some snowball effect with that. Because people just assume, well, if they need me to do it, then there's no one else to do it that's around. But that's not truly the case.
Yeah. And usually it is that if a volunteer is doing it, if you add up all of the costs of that, you're doing it at an extremely inefficient rate. So if you can just, pay the, local labor force to do a job, it's normally, pretty efficient in terms of money. But if you think that in order for a volunteer to do it, they're quote unquote doing it for free, but you have an airfare, you have have to pay accommodation, and somebody has to supervise them, and because they don't really know how to do it, they probably have to be trained how to do it. And there was actually a study done after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. There were lots of volunteers going from North America to go and build houses. And this one program, I think it was they built 38 houses or something using volunteer labor for people that were coming to that were traveling to go and do and offer that as a volunteer. And for the amount that everything costs, if you add in all those hidden costs, it was hundreds of houses could have been built by the local labor force and paid people who themselves were victims of an earthquake. And so if you're looking at, again, if you're weighing up the different options that you have in order to kind of make a difference, then it might not be volunteering, depending on what your motivations are.
Yeah, wow, exactly. So, okay, let's flip this. If there's someone listening right now that's I still would love to try and do something, I don't want to cause harm, is it even possible? Are there things out there that exist that can be beneficial?
Yes, certainly there are. I think that the first thing, like I've been saying before, that you need to ask yourself is, okay, why is it that I want to do this? And some motivations can be incompatible with volunteering, such as, we're talking about the ones of I just really need a vacation, or I want to have an easy way to make myself feel better, or something like that. And some of those motivations that might be more compatible with other things. I need to really learn about an issue, or I might need to, fundraise for a cause or something like that. And some of the motivations might be compatible with volunteering. I think the main thing to bear in mind is that it is, like we've been talking about, a bit more complicated than just sort of, booking a ticket and finding somewhere to contribute. But it certainly isn't impossible. I think the first thing to bear in mind is that it's really important to do a lot of research. And we've had people contact us and be like, oh, I don't have time to do my individual research. What I want is a list of, the top 10 best volunteer placements, and let me just choose one of those. And I think, unfortunately, there really is not a sort of quick answer like that, partly because volunteering is more, it's like a relationship. It isn't just sort of something that you can get off the shelf. And so the perfect volunteer opportunity for, your 15-year-old niece is not going to be the same perfect volunteering opportunity for your 55-year-old uncle who's an accountant. but they both might be able to find something that is suitable for them, even what the outcomes are. I would say that for a 15-year-old, really what they're looking for is a very supported thing that helps their own learning and that will position them to be able to continue to contribute as they move through their life. Whereas, with someone that is older, with someone that maybe has very specific experience and qualifications, they might be able to volunteer in a short-term way by some kind of skill transfer. But that also has to be set up very carefully. So when people are like, oh, I don't have time to research this, then really our answer to that is that if you don't have time to research it, then you don't have time to be an effective volunteer. Go do something else first and come back to volunteering when it's something that you feel like you can dedicate the time to.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think it goes back to the original point of fitting this into your 10-day itinerary. I think maybe you should focus at that point on your 10-day itinerary and your vacation, and not necessarily the giving back part. And, and I was thinking too, and I should have asked this at the beginning, in that case, if, you want to have a positive impact on the place that you're going, maybe a donation to an organization is the best course of action.
Yeah, that could be. Something else that you did mention earlier as well is volunteering locally.
Right.
Because it's one of the things that is really difficult, and one of the reasons that actually a lot of corruption can happen in volunteer placements is that you don't stay there a long time. So if you stay there for 2 weeks and you do something nice and you feel good about it, and you can see like, oh, I don't know, I've built this fence or I've painted this wall or something that seems really concrete. We've literally witnessed projects where they just get the same wall painted over and over again, or where they take down the fence and get people to put it back up again because people are paying for this kind of experience. Really, it's really
that's insane.
In the learning service book, we have a quote from a leader, like a women's activist leader in Ghana, who was saying something like, when the Americans come, they always say that they always seem to want to paint something. So we always make sure that there's something that they want to paint. They don't do a very good job, so we will probably have to repaint it afterwards, but we want to keep them happy. So we'll always provide what they need.
Wow.
And there's no understanding at all.
Wow.
That is not to be for their own benefit. It's just seen as like a tourist attraction, basically.
1,000% is a tourist attraction. There's no other way to put that. And, I was thinking, so previous to working in the travel industry, I did work in the nonprofit world, and my job sometimes intersected with volunteers. And a problem that we would have, and, I didn't really think about it then, was that long-term support. And because you'd have people come in, and I'm not saying that, this is bad and, people should stop doing this because day volunteers are important, but there were issues with, we'd have new people come in, they would do this one task, then we have to retrain them the next day, but then we really needed support that was long-term and consistent and didn't have to be retrained and didn't have to be retold, because then you're taking staff away from their regular job to have to go and do this thing again and again and again. And so in some cases with some of those things, we were never able to get projects off the ground because it was just so inconsistent.
Yeah, I think that's another big question that you have to ask is, basically, is it going to take someone else more time to train and supervise you, and also, help you through the daily living in a foreign country, translate for you, help you if you have problems buying groceries, all these things that you sort of rely on an organization for when you go to volunteer. Is it going to take someone more time to do that than you can realistically give back? Because what often happens is that organizations, especially sort of younger ones that are thinking they want to get the support of foreign volunteers, and it seems really nice, we can get this for free, they will realize that so much energy has to be diverted from their core work in order to kind of, ensure that the volunteers are sort of able to contribute anything. That is actually, it's not worth it. It's that they end up having to give more to the volunteer program than they do to their core mission. And so it's another thing to really think about when you're looking for volunteer placement is, that you can offset that in two ways. You can either have very high and needed skills and be very careful about where you place them. So, for example, if you have something that you can train a counterpart on within a couple of weeks, that could be something that's really useful. Or the other thing, honestly, is just time. So when we talk about voluntourism, we're usually talking about a short period of time that's fit into a vacation. But if you're thinking about longer term volunteering, that is something, if you accept that you're probably going to go into a placement and not know that much, but over time, you will build up the necessary competencies to be able to contribute, then that's another way that you can sort of offset the fact that it's, you're going to have some teething problems at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say, so if someone is researching a project, do you think they realistically can assess just from, Googling that they are going to be able to make a positive impact before they say yes to this program?
So basically, there are a lot of things that you can definitely sort of look for to say that I probably will not have a positive impact, and that are easy to rule out. So some like red flags to look for, I think, if you get projects that are really overemphasizing the need for volunteers, it's possibly that they're kind of unsustainably dependent on volunteers instead of local support, and you need to question why that is. Or if they are sort of using the language of saviorism, making the volunteer seem like a hero. Again, an organization would not be very sustainable if they are completely relying on outside support. The other thing to look for is the kind of language that's being used. So we touched on this idea of poverty porn. If there is a lot of language that invokes pity or images that invoke pity, that's one thing to kind of maybe avoid. That it will maybe not be treating the people that it works with dignity. And then the other language to look out for is the language of tourism. If it's like, you get to do this and this and this, and it sounds really fun, then, you can be questioning what will actually be the impact of you being there. And, and I think the other thing is that if everything seems to be catered towards you as the individual, so we refer to it as like the all-inclusive buffet, meaning that if it's like you can leave on any day, you can go to any project, you can just click a few links and then you can get there, and it's all kind of tailor-made to you, then again you can be questioning, like, why is this tailor-made for me when I'm trying to do something that's helping someone else? Like, really, as a volunteer, you need to be thinking about how you can be adaptable and how you can fit in and be as much help to other people's needs. And so if it really looks just like, basically like you're picking a tourist experience, then it's pretty likely that it won't be having that much of an impact on the ground. So there are several red flags that you can look for. The other thing that you can do, so basically you want to be looking for an organization that can easily answer all the questions that you have. We have some assessment tools that we can highlight for you. And then there are other things that you can find online that just like a series of questions. And it's not like a series of questions to be emailed to an organization because they might not have time to answer them. It's basically a series of questions that you can see how you can find out the answers by doing things like, if an organization has got a good website or good social media presence, you can find out a lot of your answers. If you can download the annual impact reports and things like that, you can find out a lot of the things that you'll be looking for. And then there might be one or two things that you can't really see, in which case, organizations are more than happy usually to answer thoughtful questions that are not things that are just repeated from their webpage. And I think what you really should be looking for are organizations that are transparent and honest. they tell you where the fees you pay are going, and they are not claiming to have saved the world or, have really kind of unrealistic ideas of what volunteers do, but that are very sort of open about, this is where volunteers fit into our plan and this is what they do achieve. And they seem, honestly, it's got to seem pretty modest. And if you think, yeah, that sounds realistic, that sounds like something that I could be involved in, and that, bit by bit, it does seem to add up to something that is achieving, some positive impact. That seems like something that, you just might have realistic expectations of what you're going to get and what is going to be achieved.
Right. I think those are all really great things to look out for, and, definitely challenging as well. And I think then it goes right back to the beginning of really thinking about why you want to do this. What do you want to get out of this? What could your impact possibly be? And I think it's just, it really reinforces this isn't really part of your vacation kind of activity.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's so interesting with voluntourism that it is at that intersection between being part of your vacation and trying to do something with more impact. What we will often say is, if you really do only have a short vacation period and you really, really want to do some volunteering, still try and use that vacation period as your time to kind of learn and test the waters to see about, how interested you are in getting involved in some of this work. Because I guess what we say is that, like, you're never going to be able to push all of your impacts. If you're saying, like, I want to do something good with my time, but I only have X amount of days to do that in, and I'm only going to do good stuff in those days. Really looking at your overall impact, it's going to be the other, 350 days in the year that you're going to be making more of an impact day by day. And so what we try to say is, like, don't put too much pressure on your vacation. Make sure you do have a good time. Make sure you are learning and connecting to the place and to the people and all of those other things, because, positive impact is also to do with how people feel when they're around you and what kind of relationships you've established and, those kind of things. They don't necessarily, if you go there and you're really stressed because you're trying to make an impact, that is also not necessarily going to be what anyone, working in the nonprofit sector needs either.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we say, we just want people to kind of look at their life more holistically and be like, yeah, if you want to make a positive impact in the world, that's incredible. We need more people like that. So please come on board. And let's look at this in more of a long-term way. And use your vacation by all means to get involved in some of these things or to learn about some of these things. And then let's continue working out how we can stay active and engaged in these issues. And often we just say that the experience overseas is more like fuel to the fire. The experience overseas is the bit that makes it all worthwhile. But we really sort of have to think about, how are our decisions day to day impacting the world, because that is the way in which we're going to have a bigger impact overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I feel like this is kind of a trick question and it's a little challenging. If listeners, as we wrap up, remember just one thing from this conversation, what should it be?
Okay. So, I was a co-author on a book called Learning Service, The Essential Guide to Volunteering Abroad. And it's a very big book, and it incorporates all of the lessons that we've been talking about, and has loads of examples and really goes a lot more in depth into both the harms and the benefits and the ways to do this kind of stuff right. It's quite a big book. It's ended up quite a big book because of that. So I always say that I realize that not everyone has got the patience to read the full book. So we always say that we can sum up the book in 3 sentences. So here are the 3 key messages of, I guess, successful or impactful overseas volunteering. The first one is you have to learn before you can help. A lot of people will go abroad and say, oh, I learned so much when I was there, which is really good. But we can't say that learning is like the byproduct or the outcome of you going and maybe doing, something that could have been harmful or, at the very best, not very effective. The learning has to happen first. The second sentence is, the people you need to learn from are those you are trying to help. So again, it shouldn't be, us or the volunteer industry, or people who are outside of the issue deciding on what are the answers or what are the solutions. We really need to be learning from and working with people who are on the ground and who are directly affected by the issues. And so it's another kind of really important thing for us to consider when we're volunteering, is about whose voices are being heard and whose leadership are we under. Sort of recognizing that anything we do overseas might be part of an ecosystem. Yes, we might do something really, really important, but it's not going to be us as the heroes coming in. It will be us as kind of, we often say, as apprentices to people that are, doing this day in, day out. And then the third message is that both learning and service are lifelong. These are things that are, that basically it's not something you can fit into your vacation. This is something that, if you're dedicated in, trying to make a positive impact on the world, you need to be doing this in a sort of longer term way, learning about these issues and, trying to work out where your impact can be. And then actually trying to do stuff to change, again, outside of your vacation. So just to state those again, just really simply, you have to learn before you can help. The people you need to learn from are those you are trying to help, and both learning and service are lifelong.
I don't think there's a better place to end this conversation, except if people want to get a copy of your book, Learning Service, where can they find it?
Okay, so we have a website, which is just learningservice.info, and it has all the information there. You can also just order it from bookshops, and it's on Amazon and all of that. So the book is quite easy to find, but learningservice.info. We also have a blog, and we also have other resources there. And then we're on Facebook and on Instagram. You can probably find us. Instagram is learning.service, and I think Facebook is just Learning Service. But generally, if you Google us, we'll come up.
That's fantastic. I will drop all of that information in the show notes so people can easily find it. Claire, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for helping us see this issue with clear eyes and a different perspective.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It was delightful talking to you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. If you'd also like to learn more about upcoming Veggies Abroad tours or get additional travel help, visit veggiesabroad.com and also join our newsletter. It's the best way to stay up to date with loads of new content, like where to find gorgeous vegan hotels, what to eat in cities around the world, trip planning tips, and so much more. Well, that's all I've got for now. Until next time.